Imagine standing on the shore of what would one day become the United States, 5 centuries before the Mayflower, 4 centuries before the first English colony at Jamestown. Imagine that the people who reached these shores did not come from Spain or Portugal or England, but from the great empires of West Africa, perhaps even from the Islamic heartlands themselves. Imagine that the story of Islam in America did not begin with immigration in the 20th century, nor with the civil rights movements of the 1960s, but with the very first encounters between the Old World and the New. This is not fiction. This is history, a history that has been written over, erased, and forgotten, but never entirely extinguished. The story of Muslims in America is as old as America itself, and in some ways, it is even older. Chapter 1. Muslims before America was America. The question of when the first Muslims set foot in the Americas is one that historians have debated for more than a century. The evidence is fragmentary, the claims are often contested, and the answers depend largely on what one considers proof. But the very existence of the debate tells us something important. The possibility of pre-Columbian Muslim contact with the Americas is not a modern invention, nor is it a fringe theory without any scholarly support. In the 1920s, Leo Wiener, a professor at Harvard University, published a multi-volume work arguing that Arabo-Islamic and Mande influences from West Africa had reached the Americas before Columbus. Wiener based his conclusions not on Arabic literary fragments, but on linguistic evidence, similarities he detected between the languages of Mexico and the Mande peoples of West Sudan. His work was controversial then, and it remains controversial today. Most mainstream historians were unconvinced, and Wiener failed to persuade the historical establishment. But Wiener was not alone. Other scholars have pointed to a range of possible evidence. Islamic-style coins reportedly discovered in various locations, rock inscriptions that some have interpreted as Arabic script, and building remnants that some have argued resemble mosques. There are also historical narratives, such as the account of an expedition sent out by the rulers of the ancient empire of Mali, Abu Bakr and Mansa Kankan Musa, who some scholars believe may have outfitted voyages across the Atlantic. Yet the historical consensus remains cautious. As one academic analysis put it, given the fragmentary and sometimes contradictory nature of this evidence, most professionals in varied fields are unconvinced that Islam predates Spanish exploration in the New World. The evidence, when examined closely, does not amount to proof. What is documented, however, is something more certain. The first recorded Muslim in North America was a man named Estevancio, a North African Muslim captive who arrived with the Panfilo de Narvaez expedition in 1527. He would go on to transform European knowledge of the American Southwest, serving as a guide and interpreter for later Spanish expeditions. Estevancio was not an explorer in the conventional sense. He was enslaved, forced to accompany the expedition that had captured him. But his presence on the continent, so early in the European colonization of the Americas, is a reminder that Muslims were part of the story from the very beginning. There is also the documented presence of Muslim among the crews of Spanish and Portuguese explorers. It is a recorded fact that people of Muslim origin accompanied Columbus and subsequent Spanish explorers to the New World. In the late 15th century, when Columbus crossed the Atlantic, Muslims from Islamic Spain and West Africa were among those who made the journey. The first recorded arrival of Muslims in the territories that would become the United States dates to this period. This is not to say that Muslims discovered America before Columbus. The evidence for that claim is simply not strong enough to support it as established history. But it is historically accurate to say that Muslims were present in the Americas from the earliest moments of European exploration, and that the question of pre-Columbian contact, while unresolved, reflects a deeper truth. The Islamic world and the Americas were not as separate as we might imagine. Muslim sailors, merchants, and scholars were among the most advanced navigators of their age. They knew the Atlantic, they knew the routes, and they left traces, however faint, in the historical record. The real story of Muslims in America, however, does not begin with explorers or theories about who reached what shore first. It begins in chains. Chapter 2: The Muslims who arrived in chains. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, an estimated 12.5 million Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic Ocean in the largest forced migration in human history. Among them, scholars estimate that somewhere between 10 and 40% were Muslims. This would mean that between 600,000 and 1.2 million enslaved Africans who arrived in the Americas were followers of Islam. They came from the Islamic societies of West Africa, from the great empires of Mali, Songhai, and Ghana, from the trading cities of Timbuktu and Gao, from the Islamic states of the Hausa and Fulani peoples. These were not people for whom Islam was a superficial identity. Many were highly educated, literate in Arabic, knowledgeable in the Quran and Islamic jurisprudence. They came from societies where Islam was deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, where Muslim scholars were respected, where Islamic education was a mark of status and achievement. They were merchants, scholars, soldiers, and leaders of their communities. And then they were enslaved. The transatlantic slave trade did not distinguish between Muslims and non-Muslims. It did not care about religious identity, educational achievement, or social status. Muslim merchants were themselves involved in the slave trade in West Africa, and some of the enslaved Muslims had been captured in wars or raids that were partly driven by Islamic political transformations. The Atlantic slave trade drew captives from many different ethnic and religious groups, and Muslims were among them. In the Americas, these enslaved Muslims entered a hostile world, a world that enslaved free Muslim men and women, a world that sought to strip them of every aspect of their identity. They faced a Christian society that viewed Islam with suspicion and hostility. Their names were taken from them. Their languages were forbidden. Their faith was denied, mocked, and suppressed. And yet, as the historian Sylviane Diouf has documented in her groundbreaking work Servants of Allah, Islam flourished among enslaved Africans on a large scale. Even while enslaved, many Muslims managed to follow most of the precepts of their religion. They prayed, they fasted, they gave charity when they could. They struggled to keep their religion alive in a world that was determined to extinguish it. And in doing so, they left behind a legacy that scholars are only now beginning to fully understand. We know about these enslaved Muslims because some of them left written records. The most remarkable of these is the autobiography of Omar Ibn Said, a West African Muslim who was captured in Senegal and brought to Charleston, South Carolina, as a slave. In 1831, Ibn Said wrote a 15-page autobiography in Arabic, describing his life and experiences. It is the only known extant narrative written in Arabic by an enslaved person in the United States. Ibn Said was a member of the Fula ethnic group of West Africa, and he came from a wealthy family. He spent more than 25 years as a scholar and Muslim in Senegal before he was captured at the age of about 37. An army came to his home, killed many people, captured him, and sold him into slavery. His autobiography, preserved today at the Library of Congress, is a document of extraordinary historical significance. It is important not only because it tells the personal story of a slave written by himself, but also because it documents an aspect of the early history of Islam and Muslims in America. As the chief of the African and Middle Eastern Division at the Library of Congress noted, the significance of this manuscript lies in the fact that it was not edited by Ibn Said's owner, as slave narratives written in English often were. It is more candid and more authentic. It attests to the high level of education and the long tradition of written culture that existed in Africa at the time. Ibn Said was not alone. Other enslaved Muslims left their mark on history. There was Ayuba Suleiman Diallo, also known as Job ben Solomon, an 18th century enslaved Muslim who eventually won his freedom and returned to Africa. Diallo came from a prominent Fulani family and was captured in 1730 while traveling to a British trading post on the Gambia River. He wrote several copies of the Quran from memory. There was Abdul Rahman Ibrahima ibn Sorai, a Muslim prince from the Fouta Jalan region of West Africa, who was enslaved in Mississippi and became a local legend before eventually being freed and returning to Africa. There was Bilali Mohammed, Sali Bilali, Lame Nakib, and Mahama Gardo Bakwakwa, Muslims who were enslaved and brought to the Americas, who left behind fragments of their lives, their faith, and their struggles. The stories of these men are not just stories of suffering. They are stories of resistance, resilience, and the refusal to surrender identity. Enslaved Muslims in America drew on Islam to maintain their sense of self, to resist the dehumanization of slavery, and to imagine a future beyond bondage. Their faith was a source of strength, a connection to their past, and a vision of a different world. And yet, despite their numbers and their resilience, these enslaved Muslims did not leave behind self-sustaining communities. Islam did not take root among their descendants in the same way that African spiritual traditions did. The pressures of slavery, the forced conversion to Christianity, the sheer brutality of the system, all of these factors combined to sever the transmission of Islamic faith from one generation to the next. But the legacy of these enslaved Muslims did not disappear. It survived in the memories of their descendants, in the written fragments they left behind, and in the ongoing story of African American identity. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, that legacy would resurface in new and unexpected ways. Chapter 3: The Long Silence and the Arrival of New Muslim Communities. The 19th century was a period of transition for Muslims in America. The last generation of enslaved African Muslims was dying out, and their descendants were increasingly assimilated into the African American Christian community. The transmission of Islamic faith had been broken. For a time, it seemed as though the Muslim presence in America might simply fade away. But the 19th century also saw the beginning of a new chapter in the story of Muslims in America, the arrival of voluntary immigrants. These were not enslaved people, but free men and women who chose to come to America in search of opportunity. The first significant wave of voluntary Muslim immigrants occurred during the last decades of the 19th century and into the beginning of the 20th century. They came primarily from the Middle East, particularly from the Ottoman provinces of Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. These immigrants were often single men, attracted by economic opportunity. Many worked as peddlers, traveling from town to town, selling goods to communities across the American heartland. By the 1870s, these Syrian immigrants, as they were called, regardless of their actual nationality, were arriving on the East Coast. They were not all Muslims. The majority were Christians, but a significant minority were Muslim, and they brought with them their faith, their traditions, and their hopes for a new life. Between 1899 and 1919, some 90,000 immigrants from Ottoman Syria settled in the United States, mostly in the eastern part of the country. They faced the same challenges as other immigrants: language barriers, discrimination, the struggle to find work and build communities. But they also faced unique challenges as Muslims in a predominantly Christian society. The Naturalization Act of 1790 had stipulated that only free white persons of good moral character could become citizens. This discouraged dark-skinned Arab, Indian, and African Muslims from immigrating. For much of the 19th century, immigration laws effectively barred most non-Europeans from becoming citizens. It was not until 1944 that Muslims were legally recognized as white for the purpose of citizenship, and even then, the classification was inconsistent. Despite these obstacles, Muslim communities began to form. By the 1920s, American Muslims were widely diverse and dispersed throughout the United States. There were South Asians, Albanians, Turks, Bosnians, and Syrians Lebanese, scattered in small communities across the country. South Asian Muslim immigrants had started coming to the U.S. from what is today India and Pakistan as early as 1901, traveling by ship from India, entering through the port of Vancouver, Canada, and migrating south to California for better farming opportunities. Bosnian Muslims began entering through eastern ports and migrating to Chicago beginning in 1906. These early Muslim communities did not have enough funds or people to establish mosques. Instead, they met in private homes, rented halls for holidays, and founded social organizations intended to preserve both their ethnic and religious heritage. The first documented communal prayer of Muslims in America was in Ross, North Dakota, in 1900. By the 1920s, small communities across the United States were gathering for prayers and forming the first Islamic associations. One of the first groups formed was a Muslim charitable organization, the Red Crescent Society in Detroit, Michigan. Other early associations included South Asians in Sacramento, Bosnians in Chicago, and small immigrant communities from Syria, Lebanon in Detroit and Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And then came the mosques. The first known American mosques were established in Biddeford, Maine in 1915, in Ross, North Dakota in 1920, in Highland Park, Michigan in 1923, and in Michigan City, Indiana in 1925. In 1934, the building now known as the Mother Mosque of America was established by a Syrian Lebanese community in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It is a simple, one-story wood frame prairie schoolhouse-style building. Fundraising for the mosque included community dinners and appeals to other Muslim communities scattered throughout the U.S. This simple structure, nestled in America's heartland, is the oldest purpose-built mosque that is still in use today. There were also American converts to Islam during this period. The most notable was Mohammed Alexander Russell Webb, a journalist and former U.S. consul to the Philippines who converted to Islam in the late 19th century. Webb became one of the first European ancestry converts to Islam in the U.S., and he started one of the first Islamic reading rooms, 3 Islamic newspapers, and a small bookstore and lecture series. For the rest of his life, he was the main spokesman for Islam in America. Webb was a central figure in the early history of Islam in America, a white Muslim convert who challenged the prevailing anti-Islamic sentiments of his time. But the growth of these early Muslim communities was interrupted by broader historical forces. The First World War, the Immigration Act of 1924, and the Great Depression all slowed Muslim immigration. Racially biased immigration laws severely restricted the growth of many early Muslim communities. Declining immigration and rising assimilation eventually caused most of the early mosques to close. The long silence was not yet over, but beneath the surface, new movements were stirring. In the African American community, a different kind of Islamic revival was taking shape. Chapter 4: Islam, Black America, and the Search for Identity. In the early decades of the 20th century, as millions of African Americans were leaving the rural South for the industrial cities of the North, a new chapter in the history of Muslims in America was beginning. This chapter was not about immigration from Muslim-majority countries. It was about something else entirely: the reclamation of an identity that had been stolen, forgotten, and suppressed. The involvement of Black Americans with Islam reaches back to the earliest days of the African presence in North America. But by the 20th century, that connection had been largely severed. The descendants of enslaved African Muslims were overwhelmingly Christian, and the memory of their ancestors' faith had faded. Yet the longing for a different identity, an identity not defined by slavery, oppression, and the legacy of white supremacy, remained powerful. In 1913, sectarian Islamic movements began to arise in the African American community. These movements rejected the racism and economic deprivation supported by many white Christian movements in America and claimed an African history and culture identified with Islam. They offered a vision of Black identity that was proud, powerful, and connected to a global civilization. The largest and most influential of these movements was the Nation of Islam. It was founded in Detroit, Michigan, in July 1930 by Wallace Fard Muhammad, a mysterious figure who claimed to come from the Islamic city of Mecca. Fard taught that Islam was the original religion of Black people, and that white supremacy was a system of oppression that could be overcome through self-knowledge, self-reliance, and faith. Fard established the first Nation of Islam temple in Detroit in 1931. He designated his assistant, Elijah Poole, a man born in Sandersville, Georgia, who had moved north as part of the Great Migration, to establish the nation's second center in Chicago. After Fard mysteriously disappeared in 1934, his mantle fell to Poole, who renamed himself Elijah Muhammad. He moved the headquarters to Chicago and began building the Nation of Islam into a national movement. Elijah Muhammad taught that Fard had been Allah incarnate, a belief that caused a split in the movement. But the Nation of Islam continued to grow, attracting thousands of African Americans who were seeking a new identity and a new sense of purpose. The Nation of Islam was not Orthodox Sunni Islam. Its theology was distinctive and, in many ways, heretical from the perspective of mainstream Islamic tradition. It taught that God had appeared in the person of Fard, that Elijah Muhammad was his messenger, and that Black people were the original and chosen people of God. It emphasized racial separation and Black self-determination, and it rejected the integrationist goals of the mainstream civil rights movement. But the Nation of Islam also drew on Islamic symbols, practices, and language. It required its members to pray, to fast, to give charity, and to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, or rather, to the nation's own version of Mecca. It gave its members Arabic names. It offered a vision of Islam that was accessible and empowering for African Americans who had been told that they had no history, no culture, and no religion of their own. The most famous member of the Nation of Islam was Malcolm X, born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska in 1925. He was the son of Earl Little, a Baptist minister and follower of Marcus Garvey. Malcolm's family was torn apart by racism. His father was killed, and his mother was committed to a mental institution. Malcolm ended up in foster care, then in a juvenile detention center, and eventually in prison for burglary. It was in prison that Malcolm discovered the Nation of Islam. He converted, changed his name to Malcolm X, and upon his release became one of the nation's most charismatic and effective ministers. He was a powerful speaker, a brilliant organizer, and a fierce critic of white supremacy. He argued that Black people had the right to defend themselves by any means necessary. He rejected the nonviolent approach of Martin Luther King Jr. and the integrationist goals of the civil rights establishment. But Malcolm X's journey did not end with the Nation of Islam. In 1964, he broke with Elijah Muhammad, disillusioned by the leader's personal scandals and by the constraints of the nation's theology. He made the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, and experienced a profound transformation. In a letter from Mecca, dated April 25, 1964, Malcolm X described his pilgrimage and his new insights on race. He wrote, "During the past 11 days here in the Muslim world, I have eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, and slept on the same rug while praying to the same God with fellow Muslims, whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white." He had seen, for the first time, a world where people of different races worshiped together as equals. It changed everything. Malcolm X returned to the United States as El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, a changed man. He had come to embrace Orthodox Sunni Islam, and he had come to believe that the fight for racial justice could not be separated from the fight for human dignity and spiritual truth. He continued to speak out against racism and oppression, but he did so now from a perspective that was broader, more inclusive, and more hopeful. On February 21, 1965, Malcolm X was assassinated while giving a speech in New York City. He was 39 years old. His legacy, however, was enduring. The Nation of Islam continued to grow, and it eventually gave rise to a wide range of African American Muslim movements. In 1975, after the death of Elijah Muhammad, his son Warith Deen Muhammad led the majority of the nation's members toward Orthodox Sunni Islam. Other splinter groups maintained the nation's distinctive theology, and a new generation of African American Muslims, Orthodox Sunni, Sufi, and otherwise, continued to build on the foundations that Malcolm X and others had laid. The story of Islam in Black America is not a simple story. It is a story of struggle, identity, and transformation. It is a story that connects the enslaved Muslims of the 18th and 19th centuries to the civil rights movements of the 20th, and to the diverse Muslim communities of today. Chapter 5: Building a Muslim America. The year 1965 marked a turning point in American history. The Immigration and Nationality Act of that year removed the discriminatory barriers that had limited immigration from Asia, Africa, and other regions outside Europe since the 1920s. It was a response to the civil rights movement and to the recognition that America's immigration policy had been built on racial discrimination. The new law opened the doors to a new wave of immigrants from around the world. For Muslims, the impact was transformative. The 1965 Act catapulted immigration from Muslim-majority countries to the United States. Muslims began arriving in large numbers from South Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. They came as professionals, as students, as refugees, and as family members joining relatives who had already settled. They brought with them their faith, their cultures, and their hopes for a new life. This demographic transformation reshaped Muslim institutional life. Mosques were established across the country. Islamic schools were founded. Organizations were created to serve the needs of the growing community. The Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, and the Muslim Public Affairs Council, MPAC, were among the organizations that emerged to advocate for Muslim civil rights and political engagement. By 2011, the United States had over 2,000 mosques and Islamic centers. This is a remarkable number, given that a century earlier, there were almost none. But the growth of Muslim America after 1965 was not just about numbers. It was about diversity. American Muslims are not a single ethnic or cultural group. They come from dozens of countries, speak dozens of languages, and practice Islam in a multitude of ways. There are Arab Muslims, South Asian Muslims, African Muslims, Turkish Muslims, Iranian Muslims, Southeast Asian Muslims, and European Muslims. There are African American Muslims whose roots in Islam go back centuries. There are Latino Muslims, Native American Muslims, and white American Muslims, many of them converts. There are Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, Sufi Muslims, and followers of various Islamic movements. According to a Pew Research survey, the majority of U.S. Muslim adults, 58%, are immigrants, with their presence in America owing largely to the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act. But 42% are born in the United States. The community is young, diverse, and deeply integrated into American society. Muslims in America work in every profession, live in every state, and contribute to every aspect of American life. They are doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, artists, athletes, and business owners. They serve in the military, hold public office, and participate in civic life. They are part of the fabric of America, not separate from it. This diversity is reflected in the institutions that American Muslims have built. There are Islamic centers that serve as mosques, schools, and community gathering places. There are Muslim advocacy organizations that work to protect civil rights and promote understanding. There are Muslim charities that provide humanitarian assistance both in the United States and around the world. There are Muslim media outlets, Muslim professional associations, and Muslim youth groups. The growth of Muslim America has not been without challenges. Muslims in America have faced discrimination, suspicion, and hostility. They have been the targets of hate crimes, government surveillance, and political attacks. They have been told that they do not belong, that their faith is incompatible with American values, that they are somehow less American than their neighbors. And yet, despite these challenges, Muslim Americans have persisted. They have built communities, raised families, and contributed to the nation. They have asserted their identity as Americans and as Muslims, refusing to accept the false choice between faith and citizenship. Chapter 6: The Unfinished Story. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 changed everything for Muslim Americans. Overnight, a community that had been largely invisible to most Americans became the focus of intense scrutiny, suspicion, and fear. In the weeks and months following the attacks, Muslims in the United States faced a frighteningly altered social climate consisting of heightened surveillance, interrogation, and harassment. For most Americans, September 11, 2001 symbolized the moment when their security was altered. For Middle Eastern and Muslim Americans, it ushered in a backlash in the form of hate crimes, discrimination, and devastating government initiatives. Muslim Americans were subjected to racial and religious profiling. They were questioned, detained, and deported. Their mosques were monitored, their charities were investigated, and their communities were stigmatized. They were treated as a potential fifth column, as a threat to national security, as people whose loyalty to America was always in question. And yet Muslim Americans did not retreat. They did not hide. They defended their rights, told their stories, and asserted their identity as Americans. They organized, they advocated, and they built bridges with other communities. The post-9/11 period also saw the growth of Muslim American political engagement. Muslim Americans became more active in politics, running for office, voting, and organizing. They sought to counter the negative stereotypes and to demonstrate that they were part of the American story, not a threat to it. The contemporary Muslim American community is characterized by its diversity, its resilience, and its complexity. It is a community that includes immigrants and native-born, conservatives and progressives, religious and secular. It is a community that is deeply American and deeply Muslim, that sees no contradiction between the two identities. But the story of Muslims in America is not finished. It is still being written. New generations of Muslim Americans are coming of age, and they are shaping the community in new ways. They are more American than their parents, more integrated into American society, and more likely to see their faith as part of their American identity rather than as something separate from it. Muslim Americans continue to face challenges. Islamophobia remains a reality in American society. Discrimination in employment, education, and housing persists. Political attacks on Muslim rights continue. But Muslim Americans also continue to build, to contribute, and to thrive. The story of Muslims in America is a story of survival, resilience, and transformation. It is a story of people who arrived in chains and built communities. It is a story of immigrants who came seeking opportunity and found a home. It is a story of converts who found meaning and purpose in a faith that was not their own. It is a story of people who refused to be defined by the worst that others thought of them. The history of Muslims in America is not a foreign story. It is not a story of outsiders, interlopers, or aliens. It is part of the broader American story, a story of discovery and conquest, of slavery and freedom, of immigration and assimilation, of struggle and hope. It is a story that begins long before the founding of the United States and continues into the present moment. The Muslims who arrived in chains were among the earliest Africans to set foot on American soil. The Muslims who came as immigrants in the 19th and 20th centuries were part of the great waves of migration that built America. The Muslims who converted to Islam in the 20th century were part of the ongoing search for identity and meaning that has always been at the heart of the American experience. And the Muslims of today are part of the rich diversity that makes America what it is. To tell the story of Muslims in America is to tell the story of America itself. It is a story of contradictions, of freedom and slavery, of opportunity and oppression, of hope and despair. It is a story that reminds us that America has always been a nation of immigrants, a nation of believers, and a nation of dreamers. The untold history of Muslims in America is not untold because it is unimportant. It is untold because it has been overlooked, forgotten, and suppressed. But it is a story that deserves to be told, and a history that deserves to be remembered.